To get a full grasp on what happened to me, you'll need some information about the setting that it took place in and the situation. When I was in about second grade, I went to an old, pretty poor school in northern Illinois that had a gigantic wooden playground built before it lost most of its funding. You know the types of playgrounds that make white suburban soccer mums go into conniptions, with its exposed wood ripe with splinters, thousands of wasp nests, tiny hidden areas underneath the main scaffolding, and rusty nails and chains galore. Needless to say, we kids loved it, and even the high schoolers would come and play on the massive structure when the little ones weren't there. There were always kids of all ages there at all times. What made this playground even better was a large thicketed area that the local kids collectively called the brush. It was an expanse of low-dense shrubbery that had grown into an unmanageable bramble that instantly swallowed anyone who was able to crawl inside. We kids loved it, and over the years, a maze of little hobbit-sized trails had been worn into the brush, from children crawling in and out and breaking off branches to create miniature clearings and alcoves to hold secret club meetings and play jungle. The brush was absolutely impenetrable to all but the most determined and flexible adults, and made us kids feel like big shit when we managed to sneak past the recess aides and dive into it. Unfortunately for the rookie teachers and aides, they were usually the ones sentenced to go and fetch little pricks like us when we snuck in and refused to come out. At the time, I thought the only reason the adults were so determined to keep us out of the brush was simply the fact that we could hide in there and sneak around. I was too young to understand what the weird plunger things and white floppy tubes were at the deepest part of the brush. I soon found out, however, that syringes and used condoms weren't the only thing I should have been afraid of. In the second grade, I was lucky enough to live right across the street from the big wooden playground and the thicket. Our house was an ugly brown two-story with a small lawn. At the front of the lawn, we had a tree I climbed all the time and a tire swing that I played on constantly. Our neighborhood was full of older people and young families and very quiet. So during the summer months, my mum and dad would take the dog, as well as my little brother and I, on walks around the neighborhood after dinner. Probably to tire us out so that we would go the fuck to sleep. On the last 2 blocks of our circuit around the neighborhood, I would always ask my mum and dad if I could run ahead and play on the tire swing while they slowly strolled around the corner and made their way back. They usually agreed to this only if they could see me in the yard from where they were walking, and I would sprint down the road as fast as my shrimpy little legs could carry me and play on the swing for about 5 to 10 minutes until they made it up the driveway and to the front door. One day, I must have been extra hyper and obnoxious when I asked my parents to let me run ahead and play on the swing. Even though we had much farther to go than usual, they let me go ahead. As we were behind the corner where you would turn to go down our street, I cut across a couple of neighbours' lawns to get to our front yard and started playing away. I hadn't been in our front yard very long when I heard a man's voice call, "Hey," a couple of times. I looked over to see a man in a white shirt and cargo pants in front of the edge of the brush. He was still behind some of the shorter shrubs and had obviously popped out of the thicket. I wasn't used to grown-ass men trying to talk to me and paused on the swing to look at him, pretty confused.
"Hey,"
he said, looking up and down the street.
"Hey, do you want to come and play with me?"
He didn't come closer, staying behind the small shrubs, and his shoulders were hunched in a way that made it look like he was trying to fold in on himself. Now, I was a pretty stupid little kid, but stranger danger was being pushed pretty damn hard in the schools and in the community at the time, so even I knew that his behavior was absolutely inappropriate and weird for someone who appeared to be 30 and hiding in the bushes in front of my house. Nevertheless, I tried to be polite and called back, "No thank you, I'm okay," to the stranger. I had stopped playing at this point and stood on top of the tire swing staring at the man who hadn't budged. I was a very sociable kid and liked people. I was known for running up to people I didn't know and striking up conversations with them. However, something about this guy made me uneasy. I was only 8, but this was the first time that a man had made me feel scared, for a reason that I wouldn't have words for until I was much older. I didn't want to go near him. I didn't want him to see me, and I wanted my family to hurry up and come home. but they were still about a block from turning the corner to our street. The man shuffled behind the shrubs and looked behind him and to the left, then turned back to me. "Please," he begged, balling his hands up and pulling them up to his chest in a bastardization of what young toddlers do when they don't get their own way.
"Please come over here and play. We'll have a lot of fun."
He looked fitfully up and down the street as soon as he had finished saying this, moving jerkily and visibly more nervous. I had had enough, and my stranger danger sirens were blaring at full blast. Our house was locked up since we were out, and I couldn't get inside. I remember a distinct feeling of wanting to be out of reach, not just farther away. I wanted to be somewhere where this man couldn't get to me, no matter how hard he tried. Without any more hesitation, I scrambled up the knotted rope of the tire swing up into the tree. Once I reached the first branch, I called out to the man and said, "My mum and dad said I can't play with strangers. I'm sorry." Then scrambled up a couple more branches. "Besides, they're coming home soon and I have to go to bed." The man became even more fidgety.
"Where are your mummy and daddy?"
he asked.
"It's okay to come play for just a little bit."
I didn't answer, concentrating on climbing higher. I was now at a pretty significant height in the tree, and at a level where the branches would have snapped underneath anything heavier than a tiny 8-year-old. I looked back at the man, now at a vantage point where I had a bird's eye view of him and his surroundings, and saw something that made me go into silent hysterics. Behind the man in white was another man. They were about the same age, but this man was dressed in a khaki green shirt and brown pants and crouched behind the same bush that the man in white had popped up from, only now visible from my new vantage point. I remember the scene so clearly. The man in green was in a stance like a footballer ready to tackle, or a baseball player ready to catch a low ball. But what made me so absolutely frightened was the fact that he was holding a large cream-coloured pillowcase with both hands. I knew these were bad men, and they wanted to take me away from my family and home. I was close to a screaming, crying meltdown, and told the man in white again that I wasn't going to play with him. I remember my throat was tight and I was looking around for any adult I knew in hopes that I could tell them what was happening. To my absolute relief, I saw my mum, dad, little brother, and our pitbull mix round the corner and begin to head down our street, right towards me and the creeps. I pointed with my skinny, pasty little arm and began telling the man in white that my family was coming now, right now, and that we were going to go inside. The man didn't believe me and continued to try and coerce me to come down and play in the same way he had before, only with more looking behind and to the side at the crouching man. Finally, the man in white spotted my family about 3 blocks away and jumped, obviously kicking into panic mode.
"Please, you have to come here,"
he begged, taking half a step forward in the brush. The crouching man said something that made the man in white stop, and he looked desperately back at me. They both looked at my approaching family, then silently ducked into the bushes, clambering into the thicket where I couldn't see them anymore. When my parents were close enough, I climbed down and immediately tried to tell them what happened. Unfortunately though, since I was a little thing, I have this weird reaction of hysterically giggling and laughing when I'm scared out of my mind. It's an absolutely horrible reflex and makes me look like a psycho to this day. Since I was laughing like a crazy person and jumping around with nervous energy, my parents assumed my story was some sort of weird story about an imaginary friend, or I was talking about a cartoon I saw earlier. I tried insisting it was real that night and the next day, but my parents refused to believe me and told me to hush or I'd get in trouble. I put the incident away in my mind from that point on and never saw the 2 men again nor heard about them anymore. However, about 2 years later, the brush, it was torn up, and the remnants, they were burnt to the ground by the school with no explanation given to us kids. My family moved away from that house when I was in 5th grade, then moved out of state when I was in 7th. When I was 16 and our family was eating dinner together, something prompted me to tell them the story again. My parents stopped eating and looked at each other in horror, and my mother quietly asked me if I was seriously telling the truth. I exasperatedly assured them that I was, and jokingly said that I was pretty close to ending up on a milk carton. I regret saying that, because I could see both of my parents' faces turn white, and they realized fully how close they'd been to losing me all those years ago.